I'd like to end our discussion of daily demonstrations of cultural competence by talking about simple courtesies. Much of cultural competence just boils down to people being courteous to one another. And I almost left this section of the presentation out, but I found that as I've been doing it, people really seem to connect with the things that I'm about to say, so I'm glad I left it in. First thing, greetings. Many people come from cultures where saying hello in the morning and good evening at the end of the day is just a civilized way to behave. And when people don't speak, when people don't greet one another, they take offense. I know that I like to in the morning kind of go through our warren of cubicles and just say good morning to the people on my staff who've arrived at work. And I'll be sitting in my cubicle early in the morning and somebody will come around and say, Darryle, I need to talk to you about these numbers. And I'll say, good morning. Let's start there because the conversation's going to go downhill right after that. So let's at least greet each other. And I'm amazed by people who greet me sometimes, but then look right through me at other times, or who'll know me if they see me at the Sprague Center, the building that we're in for Fairfax County Public Schools, but if I see them at the dry cleaners or if I see them at the Giant on the weekends, suddenly they don't know who I am. So pay attention to people in your workplace who appreciate a good morning and appreciate a good evening, and if you speak to people on a regular basis. You know, think about who it is you're choosing to speak to one time and not another time. Acknowledging people's presence. When you're working a registration table or when you're working in any kind of customer service kind of activity, and a line starts to form in front of the desk, what I like to tell people is there's a simple gesture that you can do that will alleviate some of the disgruntled or angriness that people begin to feel if they're waiting in line. And that's simply a matter of, if you're the person behind the desk, looking at the line and saying, I'll be with you in a minute. I'm amazed at the number of times that I go to a customer service desk. I may be at a front office in a school, and those individuals have a really tough job. You know, they're buzzing people in because the door's locked. They're attending to emails. They've got people in front of them, faculty and staff coming and going. But I'm amazed at the number of times I've been on a line like that, waiting to drop something off for the PTA or whatever, and I'm waiting, and the person at the desk is just looking down and dealing with the next person that comes up to them. And what begins to happen to me when I'm waiting on that line for a long time is I begin to go to what I call the bad place. I begin to think about all the times that I was followed around a store, all the times that I wasn't waited on in a restaurant as quickly as I would like to have been. And by the time I get up to that person, I'm annoyed, and we haven't even had an exchange or an interchange yet. And a simple gesture of looking up and acknowledging that there's a long line, that there are people waiting, and I'll be with you in a minute, can alleviate so much of that. So acknowledging people's presence. Holding the door. How many times have you held the door for someone only to have that person sail through and not acknowledge that you're holding the door? And if I'm cranky, what I'll say is, you're welcome, because I was not put on this earth to hold the door for you. I'm not a prop, okay? Or how many times have you had a bunch of things in your arms, wished that the person had held the door for you in front of you, and simply slammed it? And what begins to happen, a very natural human behavior, is you begin to cast aspersions on that person's culture, on that person's race, based on that behavior. I was giving this presentation to a group of FCPS administrators, and one of them came up to me afterwards and she said, Darryle, I understand exactly what you're saying. I worked in the district before I came to FCPS, and I had to travel the metro. And I took a little personal survey of how many times people held the door for me and what their races were. I can tell you, X percentage of times black males held the door for me, X percentage of times white females held the door. So I knew that we were talking about something, a universal experience. So that's why these little things are so important. And the last one that I want to mention is giving way on the sidewalk. The example that I share all the time is I was invited to go to a restaurant on a summer evening after work. I was tired, cranky, it was July. The restaurant was in downtown Fairfax, which is somewhat historic. So, you know, we've got narrow sidewalks in downtown Fairfax. I park the car, I'm heading down the sidewalk, and I see in the distance, maybe 100 feet away, 3 young white girls walking 3 abreast, and they're coming towards me. Now we're on a narrow sidewalk, we're getting closer and closer, and I'm saying, you know, if they don't rearrange themselves on that sidewalk, we're not going to be able to pass each other. Sure enough, we get closer and closer. They get right up to me. One of them bumps my shoulder and says, "Ow." At which point, I'm hot and I'm cranky. I put my hands on my hips and I say, "Well, if you'd single-filed it when you saw me coming from..." And then I said, Darryle, get a grip." I began to see Washington Post headlines. Fairfax administrator berates young student on a summer evening. And when I shared this with an audience, they said, "No, Darryle, it would have been ex-Fairfax County administrator berate." I will never know whether those 3 young girls chose not to single file and allow me to pass because they were being disrespectful, or because they were simply being the self-absorbed teenagers that they were. But I know when I encountered that instance, I immediately began to go to the fact that I'm black, the fact that I'm 50 years old, and I was not going to step out in the gutter to let these young ladies pass. And I had to ask myself a couple of questions. Would my reaction have been the same if it had been 3 black males in business suits? And if it had been 3 young boys in jeans with hoodies? But I think that we need to process that kind of information and think about it so that we understand those interactions when they occur. We're going to take another break. And when we break, what I'd like to do is ask you guys to talk among yourselves about whether or not you've encountered these kinds of things that involve simple courtesies with people of other cultures and what you did with that information.
Learning about culture and becoming culturally competent is a lifelong journey. It's not a destination that you ever arrive at. It's a journey, and we're on it together, and we help each other along the way.